Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. Today is a Q&A episode. I have 3 questions I want to dive into. But first, before I do that, I just want to go over a few ways that you can help support the podcast. So first, if you found this podcast to be helpful in any way, if you could leave a rating and review, and that will help more people find this podcast. And again, I appreciate everybody that listens. There's been a couple. I think there was a new review that was super helpful. And then there's been a few more ratings on Spotify and Apple. And these are super helpful. So I appreciate everybody that has done that. And if you want to, if you've given me a review, shoot me a message over on Instagram and let me know too. I appreciate it there with that. But again, appreciate everybody who listens. Next, I have my free masterclass on body recomp, what it is, how to do it. And the link to that is in the show notes. And I also have my free masterclass on nutrition periodization, right? So I go over each nutrition phase, how to do it, common mistakes, how to set it up. And again, the link to that is in the show notes as well too. And then lastly, if you haven't yet, give me a follow on Instagram, Jeff, HOEHN_, and that's where I'm most active on social media. So if you have any questions or if you want a question answered on here, I do a Monday and Thursday Q&A there. And again, I'm also just a DM away. So if you have any questions on like the content I put out on here, or maybe I said something that didn't really make sense, or maybe you heard conflicting views, or maybe you don't agree with what I said, I'd love for you to reach out and send me a message to clarify things, or again, just any questions you have. I'm always just a DM away. So with that out of the way, let's dive into today's question. So the first question I have is on deload. So thoughts on how often you should deload. So this is something that I've changed my mind on over the years. Okay. And this was something where like in the past, it was like, hey, let's do every 4 weeks. We need to make sure we do a deload, right? It was something where it's like, hey, we're going to ramp up your intensity. And then that last week, we're really going to push it. And then you're going to deload and then we're going to rinse and repeat. So that's how it was before. It was more like proactive. This is when we're going to do a deload, which I do think there's still some periods of time when that could be useful. But again, just having this blanket, okay, this is when we're going to deload. I don't necessarily like doing that. I now lean towards being more reactive. So not really taking one until you need it, or you have a super kind of like busy week. So yeah, so just being more reactive to it. Again, when we have things come up, I'll dive into like when to deload and what that looks like. But that's my views on deloading right now. It's more so when you need it versus, hey, let's take one every 4 weeks. That's how it's evolved. Okay. So next I want to go into a study recently that you could look at it 2 different ways, right? So they had 2 groups here, and they had one group that trained for 9 weeks straight. And they had a group that in the middle of 9 weeks, they took a deload week. Okay. And what they found was that at the end of the study, there was no difference from a hypertrophy standpoint, right? There was no difference. And then from a strength perspective, I think strength was impacted slightly by taking a break in the middle. So you can interpret this in 2 ways. One, you can interpret it as, hey, you should deload. You can have a week where you don't train and you're good to go. Or you can interpret it as they're not necessary. It's not going to like increase your gains or anything by taking a deload, right? So there's 2 train of thoughts there. One thing I do want to mention though, is that the way they had them deload in this study is they completely took off from training. Very rarely when we assign deloads to clients, do we ever have them just not train at all, right? They're still going to train a couple times a week. I'm going to dive into what a deload looks like, how to do it, again, reasons for taking one. So they completely took off training. But again, that's not usually how people deload. Basically, the good news with that is somebody they completely stopped training for a week and they still saw the same results as somebody who trained through the entire time. Again, you could use that as, hey, deloads don't work, or hey, what's the other one? Deloads don't work, or you should take one because you have time off if you need it there with that. And again, I think that really matches up with kind of the research on detraining and everything like that. You don't really see like muscle, it really takes extended periods of time and doing a lot less for you to really see muscle loss. So that makes sense, right? And again, these were done on, I believe, I don't know if they had I think these were people they've been training, right? So they weren't newbie trainers as well too. All right, so that's that study. I wanted to share it because I think it's interesting. And this just goes to show, okay, you could use one, you might not need to use one. Now, over an extended period of time, again, with research, we're constrained by how long these studies are. This was done over longer periods of time. Would it start to add up? Either way, potentially, but we don't know for sure because, again, we're constrained by these studies and how long they are. But again, within 9 weeks, you're not going to see a difference there with that. So now I wanted to kind of transition to when would you deload? So when you would deload would be maybe at the end of a training cycle. So again, if you've been pushing it for a while, now it's time to deload at that point. That particular training cycle's over. Now, before you go into the next one, you can take a deload. That would be a time. You have a vacation coming up, right? So if you are traveling, and I personally, like, I used to like always want to train, but now that I've gotten older, I'm like, I could get away with not really pushing my training when I'm on vacation. I'd rather spend majority of the time enjoying that. but I don't mind getting like lighter sessions. And so that would be a great time to deload and take some pressure off of training. Well, when working with clients, we're always looking at trying to line up the deload with that. Okay, hey, you're leaving on April 26th. Okay, maybe that following week can be a deload. So we know that the training cycle is going to end then at that point. And then we'll deload. And then when you get back, we can get back into regular training. So pairing it up there with that. You could also pair it up with a busy time. Hey, next week I have 3 tests, or hey, next week I'm changing jobs. Like, perfect. That's going to be a great time to potentially implement a deload into your training. Because again, you have so much other stress going on. It's going to be hard to also really try to push your training. So that could be a great time to implement a deload. Or you're just feeling beat up, right? Like low motivation, body's feeling beat up, you're really unmotivated to train. Now, if this is happening every 3 weeks, okay, you need to potentially look at changing your methods in terms of how you train. But if you've been on the same training cycle for 8 weeks and you're just feeling low motivation, that would be a great time to implement a deload, right? Go light, don't really worry about pushing it, take some stress off of training, boom, you can get in and you feel good. But again, feeling beat up, you have some maybe a little tendonitis going on, your body's just, you're thinking about how you have to push the next training session, and that thoughts, man, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do that. Again, that's a great time to take a deload. So what does that end up looking like in practice? It's usually every about 6 to 12 weeks, one of these things starts to pop up, right? We've been running a training cycle, the same training week over week for 12 weeks. Okay, once we get there, it's probably time to freshen things up. Hey, let's dial back training a little bit there with that. Clients are inevitably going to have something pop up, whether it be a busy time or some sort of vacation, right? Again, that's going to pop up at some point. Same thing with motivation and just feeling a little beat up around training. Again, that's usually going to pop up between that 6 and 12 week mark. Now, what I'll say on this is if this is happening every 4 weeks, you need to reevaluate your training methods and training protocols to see if you can make any adjustments there with that. If you're able to go 20 weeks and you're not really feeling anything, then that's okay. Can you maybe increase your intensity a little bit? Because I know there's some people out there that will preach like, oh, if you train, you don't ever need a deload. But I don't think that takes into consideration the average person and the gen pop, right? There's just going to be some times where some of these things creep up. And again, like I said, initially, like when I first started, it would have been like, hey, every 4 weeks we're taking one. Now we're going to be more reactive. But again, if we're like at 12-week mark, and, we've been doing the same exercises, I'm usually going to be like, hey, how are you feeling? Can we maybe push this intensity? Or, hey, are you ready maybe to get into a new training cycle? But again, I think the motivation thing, what we can't do with this is, oh, hey, my motivation's low. I'm in the 6th week. I'm done with this training cycle. Like I do want to push you on that. I think you need to try to push through that a little bit. If you just get to the point to where now week 7, again, you're even less motivated. Week 8, you're even less motivated. Okay, now we need to look at potentially changing things up a little bit, but also looking at potentially recovery, things outside of the gym as well too. Can those potentially improve as well too? Hey, you've been saying you're having low motivation to train. What's your sleep like? What's your stress like? And a lot of times you find out they have a lot going on. But again, this comes back to having a busy time, a stressful time there with that, right? So it's like when you would deload, like I said, on average, that's about every 6 to 12 weeks for clients. Now about how to deload. I think this is a big question that people always have is how to deload. And you have a lot of options here. There's not one right way to deload. That's the thing here is like, how do I deload? And I think, again, you have a lot of different things that we can do here. And also deload week can be used as like a reset week. There's different names that we can have for this, but I think the big kind of takeaway and like the principle around deloads, reset weeks, whatever you want to call them, is just taking off some training fatigue, right? Whether that be mentally or physically, just taking off some fatigue. So that's going to, involve you either decreasing intensity, decreasing your volume, decreasing the frequency at which you train. There's many different things that we can go at here with it. And one thing that I don't think people think about is we also don't have to, and this goes back to the black or white with the deloads. We also don't necessarily have to deload everything either. If you're feeling maybe a little bit more beat up in a certain body part, let's say in your quads or maybe your knees are starting to feel a little bit, does it make sense to also deload your upper body? Maybe, but I also think that you don't necessarily have to either, especially if things are going well there. So also that's one thing you can do is you can also just deload some of your body and not necessarily all of it. Now, at some point, I do think that if you never deload one area of your body, again, you want to look at your methods. Are you pushing it? Are you not? And looking into that a little bit more. But again, we have a lot of options. So what I'll do is I'll feel it out in terms of how the client's feeling. What I think what I have changed a little bit too is I try not to have clients drop their weight as much as I used to in the past. Now, again, if you're feeling super beat up and certain things are bothering you, then maybe this is a different conversation. But rarely do I want clients to drop their weight by like more than 10%, maybe not even that, like it's even less now, like maybe not even at all. And really what we're trying to, especially for clients who are looking for more body composition, they're not really focused on like strength. We're more so trying to deload like volume. So decreasing volume any way we can. So whether that's like, hey, the biggest lever to pull here is the sets. Instead of doing 3 sets per exercise, maybe it's like 1 to 2. That's a big one. And then sometimes, again, it will be frequency. So instead of having a client train 4 times a week, maybe we're down to 2 to 4. We just want to hit each muscle group 1 time. Boom, you're good to go. Again, this is going to depend on what they have going on. So we have a lot of options here. We can drop sets. We can drop intensity being like, okay, so let me go back here. We're definitely going to drop intensity as well too, being like, we're not going to train as close to failure. So again, this doesn't mean you leave 10 plus reps in the tank. Maybe it does for you, depending on if we have this conversation, but typically it's going to be like, all right, most of the time we're training around 0, 1, 2 RIR, and a deload, maybe we're closer to 3 to 4 RIR. So we will decrease intensity in that way. But as far as intensity on like weight you're lifting, that's relatively unchanged unless you absolutely need it. But the big levers we're going to pull is set volume and intensity, how close to failure we're getting. Those are going to be the big things. Sometimes reps, if we're training like 10 to 15 reps or something, maybe we'll drop it down to 6 to 10 reps there with that. So those are ways to deload. And I went over deloads. So that's my deload 101, updated thoughts on deloads there with that. So again, most people, I used to think people underuse them, but now it's maybe we overuse them because again, if we're trying to make change, we do need to push our body, but they're still useful and they still are a tool in the toolbox that you can use to help manage your training fatigue. So hopefully that gives you better insight in terms of how to deload there with that. All right. So second question is, working out at home and not having enough weight, is fatiguing muscle with a superset effective? And 100%, that is a fantastic way to fatigue the muscle and to get in to make things a little bit more challenging. So doing some sort of, you could do opposing muscle group supersets or just doing same muscle group supersets as well too would be an option. What I will say on this is if you don't have any weight, like if you have any amount of weight, that's definitely going to be better than not having any weight. So definitely any sort of resistance you can get is going to be helpful. Even if it's just bands, like that's going to be better than only just using body weight, at least to a certain point. If you're pretty advanced and you have a good amount of muscle, not having resistance, like having weight at home, like you can maintain some muscle, but can expect to lose some muscle in the process as well too. It's going to be hard to go from like having all this weight and then not having anything. So again, there's some things that we can do that I'll talk about to work through that. But for the most part, it's going to be very challenging to to continue to build more muscle if you don't have very much weight at home. So any amount of resistance you can have, even if it's just like adjustable dumbbells, like that's going to be better than not having anything there with that. But some other things we can do from working out at home are really focus on long muscle length training. So making sure that you are getting your muscles in like a nice lengthened position. So for example, if you're doing like lunges, trying to get it to where you really push your knee forward and get that good stretch in the quad, something like that. Having a deficit for like push-ups to get a little bit more range of motion there. Those would be some things that I would potentially do there and really just make sure you're training the muscles in a long muscle length. You could do supersets, right? Like we talked about, you could do same muscle group supersets. You could do opposing muscle group supersets. Shorter rest, that's going to be something that you'll probably have to utilize, which means more volume, right? So if you're doing less rest, you're probably going to have to do just a little bit more volume there as well too. You could also use myo reps, rest pause sets, and you could also slow down tempo, right? So these are just a few like tools that you could utilize to make it work. But again, I need to be upfront here in that if you don't have much weight, it's really going to be hard to continue to progress past a certain point. So I would definitely invest in that or try to get to a gym if possible. Again, you can do some things to really maintain your muscle, but like I said, at some point, it's probably going to get to the point to where you're going to see a little bit of muscle loss, and it's going to be really hard to build muscle past a certain point if we don't have any like resistance that we can use. But those are a few things you can do at home there to have effective workouts. All right. So my last question of the day is a good one, and it's Chris W. from Modern Wisdom asked all fitness guests if only 10 exercises for the rest of life. And so that's what I'm going to go over. I'm going to go over and I'll give you my rationale for each one. So I think I'm going to go at this 2 ways. I'm going to go at it from, hey, if I'm just trying to hit all functions of the muscle, that would be the first one. And then 2, I'm going to change up 1 to be like more, hey, this is more of a bro thing. I want to build my upper body. Then I would change slightly how I would do it. So I'm going to go 2 different things here. So I'm going to end up going with 11 exercises, but I'm going to give you 2 different like contexts here. So let's start with like overall development, hitting the function of all the muscles. So these are the exercises I would do. So leg extension. So that would be the first one, right? That's going to be one that I'm going to incorporate in. Biggest thing there with that is that's going to hit the rec fem, and that's going to be hard to hit in squat patterns and things like that. I'm going to make sure I include a leg extension for that, right? So that's going to help with overall quad development there. With that, you could do sissy squats to replace it, but the leg extension is just going to be super solid there for that. Next would be a lying leg curl. Again, in any like RDL or anything like that, and like hip flexion, you're not going to hit all the hamstrings muscles with that. So again, by adding in that leg curl, that's going to allow for us to get full development of our hamstrings. So those would be the first 2 that I would add in. 3, hack squat. And again, why would I pick the machines? Well, the machines are just great in that you can just get in and get going with it. Again, with a sissy squat, it's hard to, you have to set it up. It's easy to mess up. Whereas a leg extension, it's pretty self-explanatory, right? So you get that stability, you can just really grip it and rip it there with that. Hack squat would be number 3. Biggest reason for that is you're going to hit the quads in this, but at the same time gives you that stability and that the machine offers, takes off some of that like spinal loading and things like that. And you can really get in and grip it and rip it for your quads as well too. So that's a full development of the quads there. So that's why I'm picking the hack squat over anything else. And again, it mimics a squat movement right there with that. Number 4, behind the back cable lateral raise. So again, to get those delts, the side delt in a lengthened position. So that would be the one that I would do there. Again, I'm choosing that because like I said, it not only is it hitting the side delt in the lengthened position, but it's also toughest in that lengthened position. So you're really overloading that lengthened position there for the delts. Again, the downside with a dumbbell lateral raise is that it's toughest at the top, which is a short position, and it's not really loaded in the lengthened position. Again, there's not that you're probably not going to build any muscle. It's just, I think you can get a little bit more out of the behind the back cable lateral raise there with that. Face away cable curl. Again, we're hitting that bicep in the lengthened position, and it's also going to be toughest in that lengthened position because of the curl, because of the resistance profile of the cables. You could doing it seated would be fine, standing up, either one. But again, that's why I'm choosing that. Again, with the dumbbell, we do a regular dumbbell curl with that. Again, it's going to be hardest in that shortened position. You're not really going to get much tension there in the lengthened position. Next would be a neutral grip lat pull down machine, or just lat pull down. Doesn't necessarily have to be a machine. Probably a pull down would be better than like a machine pull down, but I think either one's fine. Biggest thing there with that is you can alter your body to hit different your lats as well too, but it also allows for you to really hit your lats because you're in that neutral position there with that. So that's why I'm going to do that. But again, you can move your body up and down and hit different portions of the lats like I talked about. So again, this is a way to hit different areas of the lats there with that. Probably some sort of like chest support machine row for the upper back. So something where I have my chest support, and it's got handles that kind of can move freely, and you can hit that for the upper back. That's what I would do there with that. But again, some chest support machine row there with that. Not like hammer strength or anything like that, but something that maybe is a cable stack or something like that would be super helpful there. So again, like I talked about, this is going to be something where this is more for just like overall muscle development, but throwing in a Romanian deadlift. Again, that's going to hit your hip hinge there with that. So that's why I threw that one, and really no other reason to explain that other than that's going to hit your hamstrings, a little bit of glute as well too. And get that hip hinge movement in there. Next, chest press machine that converges. So most chest press machines just press straight out, but if we can get one that converges, we can hit that shortened position a little bit more, and it's also going to hit that lengthened position. So a good chest press machine that converges would be why I would choose that. Again, with dumbbells, they are going to load that lengthened position, but then the shortened position is going to be a little bit tougher to get to because as you get to the top portion there, it's going to be more like delts versus actual chest. Whereas like with a chest press machine that converges, you get that natural path, and you can hit your chest in the shortened position, and it keeps the tension on your chest and that from that point there with that. And then lastly, an overhead tricep exercise. So again, something where I'm going overhead with my tricep would be the next one there with that. So those would be my 10 exercises. The only thing I would change would be like, if I'm going to be more of a bro and try to hit my upper body, I would do either like a high incline dumbbell, like a high incline pressing motion, or something that gets my lower pec as well too, and gets me in this, like this, can't really see if you're not watching, but something that kind of hits that lower chest portion there with that. So that'd be the only change I would potentially make with that. So those are my exercises. Again, I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts. If you have any follow-ups on these, why I chose that over this. I tried to explain it as best as I could, but again, if there's something that you're curious about, I'd love to hear that. Again, you can just reach out to me on Instagram. So that's it for this episode. If you have any questions on when to deload, what your macros should be, what phase of training you need to be in, what phase of nutrition you need to be in, then I have my free 30-minute strategy call, which is for you, where we can map out a game plan for you for the next couple months, and we can just connect as well too. So if you're interested in that, the link to that is in the show notes. And that's it for this episode. I will chat with you next time.